Welcome. It's very nice to be here. My name is Paulina Nozka. I'm the lead career consultant at Ryerson Career Center, and I'm also the career consultant working closely with the Chang School of Continuing Education here at Ryerson University.
And I'm Cathy Mann. Thanks for inviting us to speak to you. I'm the academic coordinator for Ryerson University's Fundraising Management Certificate Program. And we're delighted to be talking about getting a job in fundraising.
Absolutely. Before we start, we were hoping that you can answer a quick poll just to gauge your level of familiarity with the topics. Based on that poll, we can adjust what we talk about.
Great. So I'd like to encourage everybody to just go ahead and vote on your screen. You can just click the answer that applies to you. So we have, what's your experience level in the fundraising profession? I'm a new fundraiser. I've been a fundraiser for the past few years. I'm an experienced fundraiser. And it looks like we've got just about everybody chiming in here. So I'm just going to close and share that with everyone. So Paulina and Cathy, it looks like 59% I'm a new fundraiser, 29% I've been a fundraiser for the past few years, and 12% I'm an experienced fundraiser.
Okay, so we have everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Just quickly, what we'll be talking about today, we'll have in about 50 minutes or so, we'll just do a brief introduction to fundraising. We'll talk about assessing your fit for the profession. We're going to really focus on the employer perspective, and Cathy here is the expert on that front, so she'll be sharing her experiences with that. And we'll go briefly into some job search strategies and the basic elements of an application of what you should keep in mind. So just an overview. There are quite a few fundraising jobs out there, as you probably know if you're joining us here. There are currently about 170 fundraising jobs posted on Charity Village. And annually, Charity Village gets about 3,500 jobs posted that are all fundraising related.
Okay. Yeah. So that's sort of the lens through which you can think about finding fundraising jobs. And just generally in terms of the overall overview of the sector, you probably already know this, but there are about 86,000 charities in Canada right now, of which about 50% have less than $50,000 in annual revenue. So I think that's a useful piece of information to have. What it means is that while there are a lot of charities, there are a lot of very small charities in our sector, and that influences those fundraising jobs because the very small charities have less revenue to be able to invest in a fundraising practitioner. I think it's useful at this point to just talk about what are some of the types of jobs that you might come across in the world of fundraising. And those of us in fundraising often default to thinking about a typical fundraising shop. So you might think of a small shop where you'd be a generalist and you'd be expected to do everything from soup to nuts. So you'd be expected to write the direct mail letter and get it sent out and do some social media and run a special event and write some foundation grants and maybe even do some major gift fundraising. In a bigger shop, you'll be expected to be more of a specialist because there will be people doing all of those different tasks and specializing in them. So some of the specializations you'll see in a bigger fundraising shop include annual giving, major giving, and that might include corporate and foundation also. It may also focus more on individuals in a really big major gift shop. Database management, perhaps the most undervalued element of our sector, but in my view, critically important to the work that we do.
And that's not something that we actually think about, like people who aren't in the sector, like me, you know?
Mm-hmm.
We don't think of database management at all.
Yeah, and it's perhaps, you know, I mean, your biggest asset in any fundraising shop is your data. And you want to make sure that you treat it with the tender loving care that it requires so that it can give you the information you need to to be more effective at raising funds. So there's also other things that sometimes we don't think about. Research, and especially in bigger fundraising shops, you'll have all kinds of prospect research professionals who really do nothing but pore over information to try to give their fundraisers richer knowledge about the relationship building that they're going to do with their donors and prospective donors. Admin and support functions are critically important in a fundraising shop, and oftentimes a really good way to get into fundraising, especially in a bigger shop, because you can get an opportunity to practice skills that you already have and learn about fundraising from the people who are around you. Special events is another one that we often think about. Cause-related marketing, and increasingly digital and social media is an important component of fundraising. So those are the sort of typical things that we think about in a fundraising shop, but there's a whole other world in fundraising, and that is supporting organizations like consultants that support the work that fundraisers do. So for instance, there are companies that do nothing but donor recognition. They create donor recognition walls and help you put together donor stewardship plans and that sort of thing. There are companies that sell donor databases, and that's a big business. There are companies that do nothing but help you with direct marketing, or that will help you set up your planned giving program, or that will help you run your capital campaigns. So while you might want to think about fundraising in the context of working for a charity, there are also opportunities for working for private sector corporations that support the charitable sector.
Wow, it's a lot varied than most of us think about, I think. Just got the next slide going. So before you go, and you'll see lots of nice postings on Charity Village, and they sound good, they pay well, they look interesting, and you're in job search mode, so you have your application ready, you're just going to go and apply and hit send. But please don't start with that. That is, there's a lot more to the job search process than that. There is actually no magic pill, despite the fact that I have a photo of one on the slide right here. Employers can tell, and we'll talk about that more later, but employers can tell if the application that they receive is from somebody who's actually focused and interested in the field. So before you go for that job, ask yourself why you're doing that. Is it just for the money? Does it sound good? Are you, just in need of a job and this seems like a likely option? Or are you actually going to be interested in it? So we need to be strategic in our approach.
Yeah, and I think that you want to be strategic and you want to be thoughtful about what it is you're good at and what it is you want to do. And I think this is a particularly important question for those of you who are looking for your first job in fundraising. It's oftentimes the hardest fundraising job to get. Once you have fundraising experience, you're much more marketable and attractive to employers because you've already learned some on-the-job skills. So that first job can be the hardest one to get, and you really want to think about what it is you like. We often hear in fundraising that you want to be passionate about the work that you're doing. I've been fundraising now for over 20 years, and I like to think that I've been passionate about every job that I've done, but when I look back on it, what I realize is that those jobs where I've had a real sense of satisfaction, I've been able to bring a sense of empathy about the cause. You can't be passionate about every single cause that exists in our sector. I mean, we represent 86,000 charities, and I don't know how many causes that reflects, but I think bringing that sense of empathy to a cause can be incredibly important to help you, determine whether or not it's a good fit for you. So I think in terms of conducting a self-assessment, that's a really important component. What do you care about? What can you be empathetic about? And what do you not want to be involved in?
Exactly. And what are you good at? You know, so absolutely what makes what you do worthwhile, that empathy bit, but you know, what do you enjoy? What are you good at? What are you like as a person? Are you likely to fit in with the organization that you're applying for? Focus on your skills, strengths, personality type, the values that you hold dear, and what kind of environment you want to work in. And it might sound strange that in a job search webinar, we're talking about conducting a self-assessment right up front. But I think without that, you're not going to get far. Even if you end up getting a job by chance, you're not likely to be as successful in it as if you actually went through that process. And despite what you might hear, the most successful job search strategy is actually knowing what you want and what you will bring into that environment and the why you want that.
And that is critically important in our world. We often talk about when you're getting, especially your first job, are you going into well, no, not just your first job, for any job, are you going into an organization that has a culture of philanthropy? And the question that I get from people quite often is, well, how can you tell if an organization has a culture of philanthropy? Let me back up and just describe what that is a little bit. Oftentimes, especially in organizations that are new to philanthropy, they may not fully understand what it takes to raise money in an organization. And so through lack of experience, they may not offer the support that a fundraiser needs to be successful. So one of your tasks, if you're looking for a new job, is to really suss out whether or not there's a culture of philanthropy within the organization. So if you're the first-time fundraiser going in there, know that you're going to be helping them institute a culture of philanthropy. You're going to be going through a lot of steep learning curves with the entire organization, because nothing teaches an organization how to fundraise like fundraising. But this is where doing some networking and knowing some people in the field and having people you can reach out to and make some informal calls will help you, because you want to talk to people who understand the sector, who understand fundraising, and who may have some insights into whether or not the organization you're thinking of working for has this intangible thing we call a culture of philanthropy, and are they set up in such a way that they're going to help you as a fundraiser be successful in raising funds for that cause?
So, Cathy, what qualities do you think? So, you know, let's say everyone who joined the webinar has done a little bit of a self-assessment. So there's, you know, you're coming into it really trying to get some specific information. What qualities should our participants have in order to really think this is the right choice?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one of the reasons why we started the introduction with talking about all the different kinds of job opportunities that are available is to give you a sense of the depth and breadth of different kinds of jobs that one can do in fundraising. And so when one asks what kind of qualities or characteristics you should have, it really depends on what kind of job in fundraising you're going to be doing. And so if you want to look at stereotypes, if you're working in database management, it's okay to be an extreme introvert and to not be really comfortable developing relationships with strangers, because if you're managing a database, you have to be able to develop relationships with your colleagues, but you don't have to be out there shaking hands and being at functions and doing a lot of small talk. So there's not just one personality type, but if I would, identifying some of the characteristics, I think curiosity is a really incredibly important one for us as fundraisers. What I have seen anecdotally over the years is that many fundraisers are really creative. We see a lot of musicians and artists and people who studied drama and theater before they got into fundraising. So I find that interesting. But don't feel like if you're an introvert, you can't be a great fundraiser, because in fact, some of the best fundraisers I know are introverts. And I think one of the important characteristics of a really great fundraiser is someone who can listen. And I think introverts have a real leg up on extroverts in that realm, because listening comes more naturally to introverts than it does to extroverts. And frankly, our business is all about relationship building. And if you're talking with a donor, you actually want to be spending more time listening to that donor than talking. So don't feel like you have to be an extrovert. You can be an introvert. You can be an extrovert. I think really what it says is you can pretty much be any kind of personality type to work in the world of fundraising. But you want to make sure that if you're focusing on a particular area, that your skills and your characteristics will align with that particular area that you're interested in.
And notice how, we have a slide up with some of the qualities, and Cathy just mentioned and spent focus what she said about personality. So it's clearly a big element. You mentioned skills and knowledge, but that is not the only thing. So at the core, what does an employer want? And Cathy will talk about what an employer wants in fundraising specifically, but in general, for any type of job that you go for, really, they want you to, A, have the skills to do the job. So hopefully, once you get hired with some training or minimal training, actually do the job well. Have an interest in the job, because that speaks to your ability to do the job well. Again, just because you can technically do it doesn't mean you'll be good at it. And really, they just want you to be good at it and fit in with their organization. So, have a little glacier here. There are some things that are on the surface, and those are probably the things that you think about first when looking, doing job selection. But you want your academic credentials, linguistic competence, communication skills. You're looking at your actual experience on your resume and cover, so your work and voluntary experience, as well as your technical skills and accomplishments. But underneath all that is a fit with workplace culture and values, your connections, social professional connections, and a match and ability to fit into the team. So that is in general.
Yeah, and so a couple of points about the things that are under the tip of the iceberg. Too often I see groups assume that they will hire a fundraiser who will bring social and professional connections to the organization, and their interpretation of that is that you will bring donors to the organization. A fundraiser's job is to facilitate relationships that the organization already has, or to identify relationships that the organization, with people or donors that the organization could have, not necessarily to bring a whole bucket full of donors with you. In fact, the Association of Fundraising Professionals has some guidelines around that in its code of ethics. But so those social and professional connections, however, you want to make sure that you can bring the relationships that you have to help you build your fundraising program. And so, especially if you're newer to the field, what I would be looking for is somebody who can say, well, I don't know the answer to that, but I know who to call to find out how to walk us through it. Those kinds of social and professional connections are invaluable to your organization, and we'll talk more about networking later, but that's one of the reasons that networking is so incredibly important. And I'm just going to check with Paulina. Does it make sense for me to talk here about academic credentials and schooling? Okay, great. So the other thing that employers want is they want you to come with skills. And so for those of you who are newer to the profession, it's tough to get the skills until you get the job. However, employers, especially in a market like Toronto, but I've just to frame this conversation, I've also worked as a fundraiser in Ottawa and Halifax, so somewhat smaller markets than Toronto. And I say that just because, you know, everybody likes to beat up on Toronto a little bit. So I do have some familiarity with working in other markets. The reality is fundraising has such a depth and breadth of tasks and skills that are required to do the job that nobody has all of the skills they need to be a great fundraiser. So lots of people will be hiring you for your talent and your potential and your cultural and organizational fit, and they recognize that you will learn the skills that you need. One of the things that we particularly want to see when we're hiring new people is that you've made a commitment to this sector in particular, and that can manifest itself by taking courses. So, you know, for those of you who are in Toronto, Ryerson has programs in the fundraising management program in class, but we also have a full online offering, so you can do the certificate regardless of where you live in Canada. Employers want to know that you've made a commitment to the sector by taking courses, by volunteering, by getting some hands-on experience and understanding the culture of the sector. And for any of you who might be career transitioners from the corporate or any other sector, I would say that the understanding the cultural differences between the charitable sector and the corporate sector is a big part of the learning curve for folks who are new to fundraising. You can't simply apply your corporate approach to work in the charitable sector.
Great. So next we'll look at, you know, I think the employer's perspective is extremely valuable because once we know how an employer looks for a candidate, we know how to tailor our strategy. So that's always where that starts. So how do employers look for new hires? You know, if I'll tell you for this, I'm not in fundraising, but you know, I've been in environments where we've hired. I've been part of hiring committees. I've hired for certain positions myself. And what I always do is first, I think of, do I know anybody who would be good at this job and is looking? Because when we looked at the previous slide, we talked about, you know, what's on your resume, the hard skills, the technical knowledge, but there's all of this, these things under the surface that are a little bit harder to put your finger on and to get a sense of, like, is the person good? Are they dependable? Are they reliable? Are they, you know, bright? Are they social? Or are they social enough or the right kind of social for the job? So first, do I know somebody that might fit the bill? And if I do, I'm probably going to talk to them first. Next, I'll ask people that I trust to recommend other good people. You know, and sometimes the process might end there. If I don't, or they're not available at the moment, or they're doing something else, I will then go and think of people that I've met, maybe networking events, go to my professional association, and see if I know if there's some familiar faces or good things that I've heard, or good, you know, professional behavior that I've witnessed, or somebody said something that caught my attention that was bright or smart or showed their warmth, or whatever that quality may be. I will go and, you know, if I don't know them, I'll go check them out. Like I'll check my LinkedIn network. I'll check their Twitter feeds. I will look at all of that data. You know, and then of course I'm going to look very carefully at any applications that come in, and we'll talk about how we're going to look at the applications a little bit later on.
So I think Paulina covered some really important ground, and the importance of being known within your community. So it speaks to the importance of networking and volunteering and being engaged. So if you are in a market that has a chapter of the Association of Fundraising Professionals or the Canadian Association of Gift Planners, if you're more specialized, make sure that you're being seen and that you're meeting people, because I can tell you stories of well, I can tell you a story where I was on the board of the Association of Fundraising Professionals. We were mandated with calling new members just to welcome them. I got on the phone with a new member, had a wonderful conversation, invited her for lunch the next day. She started working the following week for me on a contract that I had. So, and that was, you know, I mean, that won't always happen, but it does talk about the strength of being part of an association. The great thing is that employers ultimately go to Charity Village to post their jobs, because it is the go-to place for jobs in the charitable sector. So you certainly should be looking there, and employers are going there.
Great. And can you walk us, because Cathy, you have been on the other side of hiring specifically for fundraising.
Yeah.
And there are differences between fields on, you know, how employers look. And what you told me, and I was very like pleased to hear and a little bit surprised, was that if you apply for a position in fundraising, your application is actually going to be read.
Yeah. So you know, it's interesting. I in the last time I taught in the winter semester, a young student came up to me and was telling me about the tricks that he had to get his resume seen, and he was putting keywords in teeny tiny font and then putting it in white so that the algorithms would pick up the keywords. And I kind of laughed. It was probably the first time I had heard about that approach. But the truth is, fundraising is still specialized enough that even in Toronto, Toronto has the largest association of fundraising professionals chapter in the world. Like there are, you know, AFP exists in 6 or 7 different countries, and Toronto has the largest chapter. So that means we have a lot of very large charities hiring many people in their fundraising department. But even in that environment, your resume will be reviewed by a human being, because typically
in more than 5 seconds.
Yeah. So typically, so in addition to my role as academic coordinator, I have a consulting practice where I sometimes help organizations do job search, and I work in medium-sized and smaller organizations. If I get 50 or 60 resumes for a job posting, my client feels like they've hit pay dirt. Of those 50 or 60, if I have 20 that I think are good enough for me to do a preliminary phone call with, I feel pretty good that I've brought some great candidates to my client. So and fundraising, even in a big shop, is so specialized that you're never going to get hundreds and hundreds of people applying for an annual giving job or a major gift job or a database management job. So until the volume of resumes increases to the point where we need to start using technology and algorithms, I think we're still in a profession where somebody will take the time to look at your resume and or your cover letter.
So can you run me through like one instance or one job process of, an application comes in or applications come in, what do you do?
Sure.
And what makes them stand out? Because you said, something that's good enough for me.
Yeah, okay. So let's say I get 60 applications that come through. I would take a quick look at someone's resume to make sure they have the basic skills or can demonstrate to me that they've got the characteristics that they can learn the skills. Now, I know there's a debate, and Pauline can talk more about this, about whether or not you look at the cover letter or the resume as an employer. I fall in the camp where, in fact, the cover letter is very important to me, because I think the cover letter is an opportunity for you to make the case that you have some kind of affinity to the cause, or that you can be empathetic with the cause, as I mentioned earlier. I want to get a sense, I want to know that you can write well, because I can tell you that sadly there are lots of typos in cover letters, and writing is such an important part of fundraising that typos will turn employers off right away. And I want to feel like I sort of know your personality a little bit through reading the cover letter. So and then I know people who don't even look at the cover letter. So I guess my question is, if you have the ability to, make sure you do both. So I would look at the resumes, and it's pretty easy to identify those folks who really shouldn't have applied for the job at all. So that goes into a pile that I'll probably never look at again. I then go through the balance and split them into A's and B's. The A's are the ones who I think have the potential to be the right candidate. The B's I keep just in case none of the A's turn out to be the people that I was hoping they would be. What I then do is actually a 20 or 30-minute phone call with each candidate as a preliminary screening process to make sure that they actually have the skills that they say, and that they and that as a fundraiser they kind of can't pull the wool over my eyes too much. So from that conversation with say a dozen or 15 people, I will shortlist it and present my clients with 5 or 6 candidates who I think they want to then go through their shortlisting process. So from that point on, then the client might have 2 or 3 different stages of interviews, where there'd be a face-to-face with one person, and then maybe a face-to-face with a couple of people, and then possibly, if it gets down to 2 candidates, there would be some kind of larger panel meeting where they determine who the final candidate is.
Yes, and in general, this is not fundraising specific, you will, somewhere along the process of the interview, you will come in contact with the human resources individual. Sometimes it's the manager who's taking on that role in smaller organizations, and the person who would be your immediate supervisor, and possibly their manager or director as well.
Yeah,
and possibly colleagues.
Well, yeah, I mean, and so yeah, it's every organization is different, but because fundraising is so much about relationship building, there may come a point in the interview process where you are introduced to a number of people within the organization because you have to work closely with these folks, and we really are all about relationships. So it's not uncommon in our sector to have those kinds of multiple layers with a number of actors in the interview.
And it's a good sign if they keep calling you back. That's definitely a good sign. All right, so we're looking at elements of the job search. You know, we talked about being strategic. We now looked at how the employer looks for candidates. All we have to do is really match that. So part of that is responding to advertised positions, of course. But in order to effectively respond to the advertised positions, you should have done your research. You should have really networked. You should have filled in the gaps in case the job description didn't fully give a picture of what working in that organization or in that position would be like. So yes, so the research, you will use online sources, you will use your professional association websites, you will go to events, you will, follow organizations and people on LinkedIn, and what do you do in fundraising specifically?
Well, I actually want to tell a little story. So we have these kinds of conversations in class at Ryerson, and I remember being at an introduction to fundraising class where the instructor invited me to talk about things, and someone in class said, well, okay, how do I get my first job? And so I went through the list of things I always say. I said, well, you're at Ryerson, so the first step is good. You're completing this certificate, so you'll have the the skills and the academic credentials. You need to network. You need to volunteer. You need to just pay attention, do some of your social media stuff. And she said, well, I've kind of done all of that. And I thought, oh no, here's the advice that I always give so confidently, and it hasn't worked for her. And then a couple years later, I saw her, and she said, I have to tell you that when I asked you that question, you gave me the answers. I maybe hadn't networked quite as well as I should have, and I went and I went out and became more proactive about networking, and I got a job like in almost no time. So it's not either or. You kind of have to do all of those things to enhance your chances for getting the job.
Yes. And apply.
Yeah. Oh yeah, apply. That's a good one.
You know, when the time comes. So networking gets a bad rap often because they say, you know, it's impersonal. I'm pushing people. You know, especially from the introverts. I hear this a lot with the students that I see. But at its core, it's to the benefit of the both of you. And at its core, you know, it's making friends. It's building connections. It's people that will, you know, being surrounded with people that can rely on you, that you can help out, because that makes us feel good. And it just works in all ways.
There is some really great, there's some, of course I can't remember the name of the book, Paulina, maybe you remember, but there's some great stuff now about networking where, in fact, it says your goal in networking should be for you to figure out how you can help the people you meet rather than vice versa.
The 80-20 rule.
Yeah. And I guess what I would say about our world is that I've said this a lot, and it bears repeating. We are about building relationships, and if networking is going to be effective in our sector, I think one of the really important things is to be authentic. That notion of, you know, grabbing hands and slapping you on the back and giving you a business card and being kind of cheesy about it doesn't, I think, go that far in our sector. So authenticity is very important.
Yeah.
And I think you can, I mean, someone once said to me, you're really good at networking, and I thought, well, I don't really network because I just chat with people, and I'm kind of curious, so I ask questions. And if that's networking, then then that can be effective.
Tell you a story. I sometimes see, you know, because we host networking events here for students and in different programs. So this is not fundraising specific at all. But I've seen students, you know, I go and like I network and you know, and nothing happens, and I see them in an event, and I've had students come up to me, and complete stranger, first time they meet me, they find out what I do, they come up to me and it's like, can you get me a job? You got to be kidding me. You know? It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And I think most of us wouldn't do that, wouldn't dream of it.
Yeah.
But when you are talking to people, when you're meeting people, you're asking them questions, and you should have a story. I'm not saying and like make up a story and be unauthentic, but I mean you should have really done the homework on yourself, did that self-assessment, really know why you're trying to pursue this field, what it is that you could possibly offer an organization, and be able to talk about it, verbalize it, live it. So you should have a general story of, there should be a solid, true, fundamental reason of why you are attempting to get into this field.
And I will say one thing about networking. I think it's hard to do this, but listening is a very important piece of networking also. And I think we sometimes get ourselves worked up into a bit of a twist when we're at networking events thinking, this is my chance to shine and I have to, you know, share everything about me. And sometimes, you know, Maya Angelou said, I may not remember what you said to me, I may not remember what you did, but I'll remember how you made me feel. And I can tell you that listening to someone intently can make them feel incredibly important.
Yes.
So, so remember the listening's an important part of networking too.
Yes, but you have to be actually curious about them.
Yeah.
So when you ask a question, like really, you should want to know the answer to that question. Okay, so we have story. Now go over some of those elements in the application. So you've done all the background, you've done your research, and I have research on this skill right on this slide right here, and you're going to write an application. What that generally comes down to is a resume and a cover letter. And Cathy briefly talked about, you know, sort of the debate. Do people read cover letters or resumes? And the answer is Some will absolutely prefer a resume. Some will absolutely and say, well, I never even read the cover letter. I think statistically, you have a higher chance of getting your cover letter not read than a resume. But other people say this is really the most important bit, because this is where I get a chance to see your fit and personality. So the way I like to look at it is, a resume is an overview of your education and experience as it relates to the position you're applying for. And a cover letter is a bridge between your resume, your experiences, and that position. And the resume is a little bit more prescriptive. There isn't one way of doing a resume. I'm not a fan of templates. There are multiple ways of doing that, but still there are certain standards. And there are certain page limits, usually 2 pages. So it's hard to fit your life story in 2 pages, And the cover letter, even though it's 1 page, you don't have to talk about everything. But this is your chance to show off how you write. Like no first person in the resume, but you can actually speak with your own voice in the cover letter. And see where the match is. And some of the best cover letters that I've seen haven't even been that standard. I sometimes share a template with students who are just beginning the process, writing their first cover letter. But really the ones that stick out are the ones that are clearly written for that position and show a bit of somebody's way of thinking and dealing with the world and personality. So research, going to go over this again because really at every stage of the process you should be going through this. Research the organization. Look at, you should be looking at more than the mission and vision statements, although that's the place to start. If it's a large organization, you can take a look at their annual reports. You can take a look at what their goals are, what their plans are, and see how your skill set and ability can fit in with that. And maybe talk to people.
And that's critically important, because if you during the course of a conversation can demonstrate that you've done your homework and you happen to know something about the thing they're talking about, it makes you look good, like you've done your homework. You also, to the degree that you can, if you know who's interviewing you, do some research on them too.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So you might not always know who's going to be in the room, but you'll probably know at least one of them. So do some of that homework. But don't be cheesy about it. I just met somebody the day before yesterday, and the first question posed to him is, so can you tell us what you're passionate about and what your skills are and how it might align with the work that we're doing? And this wasn't for a full-time job. And instead of answering that question, he launched in with, well, Cathy, I looked at your LinkedIn page and I noted that we have a connection in common. And then he spent 10 minutes talking about this connection, which was completely irrelevant to what we were doing. And frankly, I didn't even know that connection all that well. So it was, he was trying really hard, but he missed the boat completely.
Yeah. And okay, so I think you're just about ready to get going with the application and respond to that Charity Village posting.
Yep.
You've done all that work. So this is how, on the slide you can see that I have highlighted a few key keywords. That's generally how I look at it. I would read the entire job description. I can sometimes get a sense of the priorities for the organization from that. And if you note, all of the things that are highlighted here are things that we have spoken about before. So it's a combination of those hard technical skills, specific know-how, and experience. So in this case, they're looking for an experienced fundraiser. And this, by the way, is a current position opening from Charity Village. So, if you have experience in planning implementation and direct mail appeals and organizing large events, then this might be a good position to look at. But they're also talking about those intangibles, high energy, donor focused, so affinity for the cause, service oriented, and specific experience level as well. So professional affiliation, your fundraising professionals. And, enthusiastic, positive, detail-oriented, flexible, energetic, all of those qualities are important. It's hard, of course, to put them on paper, but, but you're going to try. And this is just to back it up that it's not just this one posting. This is an overview from the Conference Board of Canada, and it's their employability skills. So these are the skills necessary for individuals to get job work and get promoted, move up in fields. This is general. This is not fundraising specific. This is across every profession. So notice how some of these things came up in the posting above. So don't forget about those intangibles.
And for those of you who are members of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, I can't remember if this is open to everybody or just to members, but AFP did a very comprehensive review of the skills and competencies for fundraising. So it's a useful tool for you to look at and try to assess which of the skills and competencies you have.
Oh, great piece of advice.
I know. I wish I'd told you that earlier, Paulina.
Yes.
It just popped into my mind. Sorry about that.
Okay, so for the application, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but just going back to telling your story. In resumes, it's good to really focus on what you have accomplished. So focus on achievement statements. Especially with fundraising, Cathy was telling me, really results matter. Results matter in everything. Sometimes they're easy to quantify, sometimes not.
Yeah.
But
yeah, so too often I see resumes that say I was responsible for X, Y, and Z. That's great, but you could have been responsible for something and not done a very good job at it. So I want to be able to see that you are responsible for something and that you actually achieved something meaningful. And at the end of the day, fundraising really is a quantifiable profession. Ultimately we have to raise money, but even those of us who are working in more support functions can talk about the work we do in terms of things we've achieved. So it's incredibly important, and I think Paulina gave some really great examples of the kind of language to use in your resume.
And you will have access to this after. So in your resume, accomplishment statements. So action, verb, duty, results. We usually start with the verbs because they're action-oriented. That's exactly why. And in terms of interviews, tell the story. Tell the story. Employers, interviewers want to know how you behaved in the past because past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. So, describe the context, describe what you did, how you did it, and prove that you were good at it. So the results of your actions. Often I do a lot of mock interviews in my practice with students. Often when it comes to our own experiences, because they're our own experiences, we don't think about them. When answering questions, most people start in the middle without giving enough context or background information because it's obvious to them, but it might not be obvious to the person listening. So going into interviews, do your research and practice as well. Just like all the work that you put into the application before sending it, do this again before the interview.
Just one thing that I want to add. In fundraising, some of us end up in organizations where it's not a great fit, and we end up leaving the job sooner than we had hoped. So those of us in the world of fundraising know that happens, but what you want to make sure is that you have a very good response to why you left after 12 months or 16 months. So if it wasn't a good fit, we get that. Those of us in the world of fundraising understand that happens sometimes, but you want to make sure that you have an answer that is respectful. You don't want to be bashing a former employer in an interview. So make sure that you have structured your answers for perhaps what might be a difficult question for you to answer, so that you've got a professional, respectful answer for those kinds of questions.
And before we get to the questions, in summary, what do employers look for? We talked about that combination of, can you do the job? Will you do the job? Do you have passion for it, or at least an affinity or interest in it? And will you fit in with the organization? So if you can answer yes to those questions, can you do the job? will you do the job, and will you fit in, go ahead and apply.
Yeah, and I think, and I'll also say, don't be afraid to apply for a job that maybe seems a little bit above where you're ready for. And don't, I would say if you're in your first fundraising job, don't go apply for the, president of a foundation role necessarily. But don't be afraid to apply for jobs that are a stretch, because if you get the interview, that's awesome. And just the practice for interviews is great because you learn a lot through that process of meeting with people and interviewing for new jobs that will help you in your career.
Absolutely. All right, so I think we are ready for some questions. Thank you very much for joining us. We have any questions?
Wonderful. Guys, thank you so much. This has been extremely informative, and we have quite a few questions to get through. So I'm going to start with some questions on the whole aspect of transitioning from the corporate sector to the nonprofit sector. So our first question there, what skills would you say are transferable?
All right. Well, a lot of the soft skills that Paulina talked about are absolutely transferable. And certainly things like marketing, IT, social media, a lot of those kinds of skills are transferable. And what you want to be doing is making sure that you can leverage the skills that you have in this new world. And I would say the piece of advice that I'd give to career transitioners, especially if you're coming from the corporate world, is don't make the mistake of suggesting that fundraising is simply sales, because you'll get our backs up. Sales in our world feels very transactional, and we're all about building relationships. So if you have sales experience, that's actually a super transferable skill, but you want to position it in terms of how you were successful at sales because you built relationships, and be very sensitive about suggesting that if we just did things more like the corporate sector did, we could get so much more done, which sadly I hear that kind of message from some corporate people. If you're on this seminar, you have more humility than that, clearly. But I would say humility is an important one if you're coming from the corporate sector too.
And in general, when trying to figure out the difference between hard or technical skills and transferable skills, the first group, those hard skills, are ones that you can be tested on at the interview. So they can literally give you a test or ask pointed questions and be able to tell if you actually know this or not, whereas the transferable skills are the ones that are a little bit more intangible, a little bit harder to prove, or ones that you can fool them on the interview if you prepare very, very well.
So what I would say, one of the reasons that I really counsel career transitioners to take fundraising courses is because through taking courses, you learn some of the language and some of the cultural aspects of the charitable sector that are really important. Like any profession or sector, we have our own language, and you want to be speaking our language when you're being interviewed by us.
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful. And on that note, why is getting the nonprofit experience so important, and what would be the best way to do this? Is it simply through volunteering?
Yeah, so I mean, I really think it's that full-pronged approach. It's taking some courses, it's volunteering, which is critically important. But here's a little secret: fundraisers protect volunteers from a lot of what really goes on behind the scenes. So although volunteering is critically important and something that I say you should be doing, it oftentimes doesn't give you the whole picture of what's going on in the organization. So you need to be mindful of suggesting that because you volunteer, you understand how the world of fundraising works. Because there is, if your staff are good, they're supporting you and in a way that you don't necessarily have to know all the warts of the organization.
Great.
Did I answer that? I think I missed the point. So volunteering, taking courses, and again, networking within our sector is another way to learn about our sector.
Wonderful. And here's another question from a sector switcher. Now, this person has almost completed their fundraising certificate. They just have a few courses left. They have extensive volunteer experience as a board chair. And what they're hearing from employers is that they're maybe concerned that this job seeker will be bored with a junior role, but isn't really experienced enough for a senior role. Do you have any advice for how to position themselves?
Yeah, so I mean, you know, depending on what the organizations are that are in where you live, a bigger organization might be a better fit for you, because what I can tell you about larger fundraising shops is that you have a lot of opportunity to move both laterally but also up. And sometimes for someone in your position, having an opportunity to start up fundraising in a role that that might appear junior, but then then you're given the opportunity to make some lateral moves, so you learn a whole bunch of other skills that can work. I have also helped students who are career transitioners get jobs as executive assistants. I mean, I don't know how senior the person asking this question is, but executive assistant roles are incredible opportunities for learning if you're the EA to a foundation CEO assistant, or even to like the major gift team, because you are supporting them and learning everything about fundraising as you're supporting them.
Wow.
Excellent. Great. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question on networking. How do you demonstrate that you have connections without name dropping?
Oh, that's such a good question. Yeah, because that's a really delicate balance. So I'm sorry. I'm assuming that this is in an interview or when you're meeting a new organization?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. How do you do that? That's a really great question. And I would hire you just because you asked such a great question. That shows a real, sensitivity that I think someone who wouldn't think to ask that question wouldn't show in an interview. So you're already way ahead of the game. So how do you do it? I'm drawing a blank. Paulina, you got any help?
Maybe just show some knowledge about the sector. Maybe the way that you use your contacts is to learn a little bit more about the environment, about how it gives you that extra bit of information for research to really know where the fit might be.
Yeah, and I think
in one aspect.
Yeah, and I think you can talk about people anonymously. And you also, I guess you want to be mindful, because if someone's asking you about who you know, you need to be careful about what their ulterior motive is. Are they just hiring you because you are well connected? Which, if you are, that's a huge asset to the organization. So I don't know that I have the answer. I think it's about being sensitive and
to the situation, right? Yeah. It's a little bit hard because sometimes, there are situations where I can be a lot more blunt, or I'm comfortable being a lot more blunt than in others. And it's a matter of really paying attention to your surroundings, to the person that you're talking to. And and some a little voice will say, no, don't say anything. Or so it's a hard question to answer without a little bit of background information.
I think you touched on really an important aspect, which is the sensitivity. I think you're absolutely right. If you're sensitive to that already, you're one step ahead of the game. So that's awesome. Okay, and interesting question here. If someone is wanting to break into the database management role that we were talking about is so important to the fundraising industry, but they don't have practical experience with the software yet, do you have recommendations for them?
Yeah, so if you know one software, you're going to be able to learn the other softwares because they're all based on the same premise. So there's a couple of things that you can do. A number of softwares out there have learning videos. So for instance, GiftWorks, they're similarly named, different tools. GiftWorks has a series of, I think they call it GiftWorks University, where you can go and learn about it. Raiser's Edge may even have that sort of thing. I can think of another school that's not Ryerson, so I probably shouldn't mention what it is, that from time to time offers a course in Raiser's Edge. But those are all kind of hard to do. I've had students who go to organizations and say, I will volunteer for you for 6 months if you'll train me on your database, and I'll come in once a week and do some data entry for you. And it could be a win-win.
Fantastic.
Or maybe you can teach yourself and then show up.
Yeah, teaching yourself is hard because you have to have access to the actual database.
It sounds like an area where volunteering could actually be quite beneficial.
Yeah, yeah, and I've shared that with lots of people and have had some people who've done it, and it's such a valuable skill because a lot of the entry-level jobs are asking for database experience.
Wonderful. So we'll just answer a couple more questions here because we are running a little bit over time. How would you suggest to someone to identify the culture of philanthropy that we talked about at the beginning of the session in a potential employer? What are some tips for them?
So there's sort of the informal research that you can do before or after your interview. So this is why networking is important. You want to be able to pick up the phone or send an email to people to ask questions about what they know about a particular organization. So someone like me who's been around in the world of fundraising for over 20 years, I mean, there are some organizations I just know I would either stay away from or would love to work for. So having people who know the sector and asking them can be important. Knowing people who know who you're going to work for can make a big difference because oftentimes the person you work for makes a huge difference in your day-to-day work life and the culture of philanthropy. And it's actually worth asking a well-crafted question in the interview about, I think it's completely fair game to ask in an interview how they would categorize the culture of philanthropy at that organization.
Fantastic.
And if it's a small shop that's not done no fundraising, they might look blankly at you because they might not know what that means. But if it's anybody who's been fundraising for a little while or has a bigger shop, they should be able to give you a good answer on that question.
Wonderful. And just before we get to our last question, I want to give a shout out to one of our participants who chimed in on the database experience question, mentioning that she has done exactly what Cathy recommended. She's been a volunteer in the Vancouver area and has gained quite a bit of Raiser's Edge experience and has found that that's really been successful for her in her job search. So that's
awesome.
Great.
Thanks for that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so our final question, let's just touch quickly on cover letters. What questions should you address in the cover letter? How's the, what's the best way to kind of cover the salient points in the cover letter?
In the cover letter, I usually start with the background of why you're actually applying for that position or that organization. So really high level, but make that connection. Make it clear in there of, why you're applying. And then I often analyze do my research, analyze the job posting, do like research on the organization, and come up with, 3 general areas that are key for that position. And sometimes structure it that way, where I address those key needs. I do this either by telling a story that actually, if I have done something that really illustrates my knowledge in that area, I might tell a bit of a story, sometimes using that STAR model, or look at the results, what I've achieved, and sometimes I would draw on a few different experiences that show that I've applied those skills maybe in different areas and different environments. That if you don't have something specific, but you have other, maybe you have this same experience in a different sector, and then you have some experience in this sector but not in that specific skill, you'll mention both of them to show that you can extrapolate, you can fit into that environment. I mean, there are templates out there you can look at, and that's okay as a first draft if you're having a hard time putting your ideas down, but really the best ones just speak to answer those questions for the employer. Can you do the job? will you do the job? Will you fit in?
And the one thing I would add for our world is that because we're such a, we do so much mission-based work in our sector, you want to be able to speak to the mission that's being addressed in this organization. And I alluded to this earlier, where we often say, you know, you need to be passionate about the work that you do. I think sometimes passion can make the job a real chore. I have a friend who loved the ballet and started working for the ballet and said, I've turned my hobby into a chore, and I'm not loving it anymore. So he left the ballet so that he could continue to love the ballet. So be careful about, being passionate about your cause, but that notion of being able to demonstrate empathy for the mission that's being addressed, I think is very important. That needs to come out in the cover letter.
Yes, and that's the why then. That should be in the why you're applying for that job, why that particular organization. Yeah. And I usually talk about volunteer experience. If I'm working with people, if I'm working on different projects, different organizations, I do actually mention that in cover letters, even though they don't necessarily ask for that. But it rounds off, it shows off my approach and my personality and what I value.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, both of you. Any last comments before we get ready to sign off?
You've been a wonderful audience.
Thank you for tuning in. It's been our pleasure.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you again to you both for a wonderful presentation. It was just fabulous. Before we sign off today, I want to remind all of our participants that we are going to follow up with you by email with the webinar recording and the presentation slides. We're also going to include a link to a short survey. If you can take 5 minutes to fill it out, it would be super helpful for us. That helps us to further refine our webinar content delivery. You'll have an opportunity there to let us know if there's other topics you'd like to see covered in a future session. We're also going to have a really exciting free learning opportunity that's going to be available on the Charity Village site on Monday morning, and we're going to include some information about this in that email as well, and you can look for that tomorrow morning in your inbox. So I want to thank you again for joining us today, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Yay, thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.